My name is Serafina Vale, and for 25 years, the world knew me as Mrs. Marcus Thorne. I lived in a house overlooking the gentle tides of the Serpentine River in Silver Creek, a city that wore its history like a string of inherited pearls. Our home, a lovingly restored colonial with sprawling gardens I tended myself, was a testament to what we had built. Or rather, what I had believed we built. I was the quiet partner, the one who deciphered labyrinthine contracts while the city slept, the one whose soft-spoken advice at dinner parties smoothed the path for Marcus's bold ambitions. I was the roots of the great oak tree while he was the impressive, visible canopy. For that, I had thought, we were a perfect whole. Tonight was the culmination of it all. Apex Dynamics, Marcus's company, our company, was celebrating its 20th anniversary with a gala at the Silver Creek Museum of Art. The event wasn't just a party, it was a coronation. Marcus was being honored with the city's prestigious Vanguard Award, a recognition of his singular vision in transforming the city's waterfront. I chose my dress with care, a deep sapphire blue silk that matched the evening sky over the river. Marcus had glanced at it that morning, a distracted smile touching his lips. Elegant, Serafina. Perfect. He kissed my temple, his touch as fleeting as a bird's shadow, a gesture that had long ago replaced the lingering affection of our early years. At 49, I still carried the quiet grace that had first caught his eye when I was a graduate student in architectural history, and he was a brilliant, hungry entrepreneur with blueprints for the future. The museum's grand hall was bathed in a warm, golden light, the sound of a string quartet weaving through the conversations of Silver Creek's elite. Marble statues of forgotten heroes stood silent witness as waiters with silver trays navigated the glittering crowd. I saw the mayor discussing a new city project with our banker and a cluster of tech investors near the Impressionist gallery. This was the world I had helped build, the social architecture that underpinned Marcus's success. Serafina, you look absolutely stunning, Eleanor Davies, the wife of Marcus's lawyer, murmured, air-kissing the space beside my cheek. Marcus must be walking on air tonight. What a triumph for him. It's a triumph for the whole team, I replied, my smile feeling practiced. We're all very proud. Eleanor's own smile wavered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something I couldn't quite name, pity, perhaps, before it was restored to its full brilliance. Of course, my dear. You've always been his greatest support. She drifted away, leaving me with a faint sense of unease, a single discordant note in the symphony of the evening. I moved through the room, a familiar vessel for the city's congratulations. The words were always the same. Marcus is a genius. You must be so proud of him. He has done so much for this city. I would nod and agree, adding a quiet, we've been very fortunate. Yet, as I navigated the familiar faces, I started to notice the subtle currents of the room shifting around me. Conversations would dip to a whisper as I approached, only to resume with forced brightness when I arrived. I saw heads turn, eyes following me with an expression that was not admiration, but a kind of sad curiosity. Near a magnificent sculpture of Icarus, I overheard a snippet of conversation between two women I knew from the charity board. It's just tragic. She has no idea. He's been so brazen about it. They saw me, and their talk immediately pivoted to the brilliance of the floral arrangements. The knot of unease in my stomach tightened into a cold stone. I finally saw him holding court near the grand staircase, the Vanguard Award gleaming on a pedestal beside him. Marcus looked regal in his tailored tuxedo, his silver-streaked hair catching the light. He commanded the attention of the circle around him with the easy confidence that had once made my heart race. This was his night, our night, and I wanted nothing more than to feel the solid warmth of his arm around my waist, to share in the victory I had sacrificed so much for. But as I drew near, a strange thing happened. The circle of men, his top executives, seemed to subconsciously close ranks. Their bodies shifted, creating a subtle barrier. Marcus was in the middle of an animated story about securing the permits for the new waterfront development, his hands gesturing with dramatic flair. He didn't see me. He didn't feel my presence. Marcus, I said softly, my hand gently touching the sleeve of his jacket. He turned. For a single, unguarded moment, His expression was not of love or welcome, but of pure, undiluted annoyance. It was there and gone in a heartbeat, replaced by the polite, distant smile he reserved for junior employees or overeager vendors. "Oh, Serafina. You're here." His tone was flat, a statement of fact, not a greeting. There was no kiss, no introduction to the visiting investors he'd been wooing for months, no gesture to draw me into the circle of his success. "Of course I'm here," I said, a light laugh catching in my throat. "It's our celebration, remember?" One of the executives cleared his throat and mumbled an excuse about needing to find his wife. Another glanced at his watch. In seconds, the circle had dissolved, leaving Marcus and me in an awkward pocket of silence. "I should really mingle," he said, his eyes already scanning the crowd for his next audience. "You know how these things are. The work never stops." He walked away without another word, leaving me standing alone by the staircase, feeling like a piece of furniture he had failed to notice. The rejection was a physical blow, but the public nature of it was worse. I could feel the eyes of the room on me, the whispers swirling like unseen currents. That's when I heard the words, sharp and clear, cutting through the ambient murmur of the party. "There's the frigid wife who can't satisfy him." The voice, laced with a venomous sort of pity, came from behind a marble column. "Poor thing," another voice added, closer this time. "She still thinks she's a partner. Everyone knows about Isabel." Isabel. The name landed like a stone in a still pond. Isabel Ray, Marcus's new head of communications. A bright, ambitious woman in her late 20s with a razor-sharp mind and a portfolio of stunning successes, who had joined the firm 8 months ago. The one who stayed for late-night strategy sessions, the one who traveled with Marcus to conferences in cities I was no longer invited to, the one whose name appeared with increasing frequency in his texts, always explained away as urgent company business. The pieces of a mosaic I had refused to see began to click into place, forming a picture of unbearable clarity. The late nights that were no longer about work. The sudden, intense interest in a new fitness regimen. The credit card statements with charges for quiet, intimate restaurants we hadn't visited together in years. "Serafina. Darling." The voice was sickly sweet, and it belonged to Isabel herself. She materialized at my side, a vision in a crimson dress so audacious it seemed to suck the color from everything around it. Her smile was a perfect, predatory curve. "Hello, Isabel," I managed, my own voice a faint echo in my ears. She leaned in, her expensive perfume enveloping me in a suffocating cloud. "I think there may have been a small mix-up tonight," she purred, her eyes glittering with triumph. "This gala is really for key stakeholders and essential personnel." A flicker of my old self, the woman who reviewed legal documents and understood the power of words, surfaced through the shock. "I am a key stakeholder," I stated, my voice gaining a sliver of its lost strength. "I own 22% of this company. I was a founding investor." Isabel's smile widened, a masterpiece of feigned sympathy. "We're, darling." Past tense. "Marcus has been meaning to talk to you about some restructuring. He felt it was best for the company's future." Before I could even process the implication of her words, 2 security guards from the museum staff appeared at my elbows. They were men whose faces I recognized, men who had offered me deferential nods on countless previous visits. Tonight, their expressions were blank, their eyes looking straight through me. "Security will show this woman out," Isabel announced, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "She seems to be causing a disturbance." A hush fell over the immediate area. Heads turned. Eyes widened. I saw Eleanor Davies's hand fly to her mouth, her expression a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. I looked desperately toward the stage where Marcus was now preparing to give his speech. He caught my eye for a fleeting second, then turned his back completely, adjusting the microphone as if the most important thing in the world was ensuring his voice would carry. As the guards gently but inexorably steered me toward the massive bronze doors, I realized I was not just being escorted from a party. I was being erased from my own life story. The world I had so carefully helped to build had just publicly and brutally cast me out. The cool night air was a shock after the warmth of the gallery. Each click of my heels on the stone steps of the museum felt like a final, punctuating blow. The city's familiar symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of traffic, the laughter from a nearby bistro sounded alien, as if I were listening to it from behind a wall of glass. My life, just moments ago a solid, tangible structure, now lay in ruins around me. The valet, a young man who had greeted me with a cheerful, "Good evening, Mrs. Thorne," just an hour earlier, now seemed intensely focused on organizing his keys, his gaze fixed firmly on the ground. The shame was a physical heat, crawling up my neck and flushing my cheeks. I felt invisible and horrifically conspicuous all at once. In my small evening bag, nestled beside my lipstick, was a small, flat box wrapped in silk paper. I had planned to give it to Marcus after his speech, a private celebration of our shared journey. My fingers, trembling slightly, pulled it out. Inside was not jewelry, but a custom-bound book, a miniature edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. It was the first gift I had ever given him, a tattered paperback copy when we were both young and fueled by dreams and cheap coffee. He had said my belief in him was the grass beneath his feet, the foundation for everything. I had commissioned this new edition from a local artisan, the leather cover embossed with a single, graceful oak leaf. The irony was so bitter it felt like I might choke on it. "Ma'am? Are you all right?" A young woman in a caterer's uniform, taking a quick cigarette break by the service entrance, looked at me with genuine concern in her eyes. It was the first moment of authentic human kindness I'd received all evening. "Just needed some air," I managed, my voice thin and reedy. I tried to smile, but it felt like a fragile mask cracking apart. She nodded, not pushing, but her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she turned back to her cigarette. I straightened my shoulders, pulling on a lifetime of ingrained composure, and walked toward the parking garage. With each step, something began to shift inside me. The searing pain of humiliation was slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to cool and harden into something else. Not anger, not yet. It was colder, clearer. It was resolve. My car, a practical and understated sedan, sat under the pale fluorescent lights. I slid into the driver's seat but didn't turn the key. In the humming silence of the concrete garage, I finally allowed myself to think, to connect the dots I had so willfully ignored. The signs had been there for months, perhaps years. Marcus's growing distance, his impatience with the quiet life I cherished, the way he would laud my stability in public while seeking volatility and excitement elsewhere. He had slowly, methodically, chiseled away at our we until all that remained was his I. And it wasn't just the affair that was the ultimate betrayal. It was the erasure. Every article in the Silver Creek Business Journal called him the visionary founder of Apex Dynamics. They never mentioned the inheritance from my grandfather that had served as the seed money for his first major project. They never mentioned the endless nights I'd spent using my architectural background to refine his blueprints, turning his raw ideas into elegant, workable designs. They never acknowledged that my name, Vale, had once been part of the company's original charter, Thorne and Vale Development. He had convinced me to drop it years ago, arguing that Apex Dynamics sounded stronger, more modern. I had seen it as progress. I now saw it as the first act of my disappearance. I pulled out my phone, my hands now perfectly steady. I scrolled past Marcus's name to my financial advisor, Priya Mehta. I glanced at the clock. It was 10:15 p.m. She would be home, but she had always told me to call anytime. "Serafina? Is everything okay?" Priya's voice was sharp with concern. "Priya, I'm sorry to call so late. I need you to arrange a few things for me first thing in the morning." "Of course. What's happening?" "I need you to begin the process of liquidating my entire stake in Apex Dynamics. All 22%. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. "Serafina, that's your primary asset. That's a move of, well, it's a seismic move. Are you sure you don't want to sleep on this? We can meet on Monday." "I've been sleeping on this for 25 years, Priya. It's time to wake up." "Sell it," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "And I need you to freeze every joint account, every shared credit line. Anything with both our names on it needs to be locked down by 9:01 a.m. Are you leaving him?" The question was gentle, devoid of judgment. Was I? An hour ago, the very idea would have been unthinkable, a tearing of the fabric of my own identity. Now, it felt like the only path forward. I'm choosing myself, I said. I'll call you in the morning with my lawyer's information. My next call was to our travel agent. We had a trip planned for the following month, a 2-week journey through the quiet temples and gardens of Kyoto to celebrate our 25th anniversary. It had been my dream for years. Clara, it's Serafina Thorne, I said, when she picked up, her voice fuzzy with sleep. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I need to cancel our Japan trip. Oh, Serafina, no. Is everything all right? The cherry blossoms should be perfect. I know how much you were looking forward to it. The anniversary trip. He had probably planned to take Isabel, to walk with her under the cherry blossoms that were meant for me. Our plans have changed, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Please cancel everything. The flights, the ryokans, the private guide. All of it. Serafina, the cancellation penalties will be significant. I'm aware. Please send me the final accounting. My phone buzzed. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Thorne, this is Leo from the museum security team. You left a small book on the front steps. I have it here at the security desk if you'd like to come back for it. I looked at my empty hands, then at the empty passenger seat. In my haste, I had dropped the book, the symbol of our beginning, on the cold stone where our end had been so brutally staged. Keep it, I texted back. Or donate it to the museum library. I didn't care. But I did. That was the devastating truth. I cared about the 25 years of love and labor I had poured into a foundation that had been built on sand. I cared about the young woman who had believed in a shared dream. But that caring had become a cage, its bars gilded with comfort and complacency. Tonight, Isabel hadn't just humiliated me, she had handed me the key. My phone screen lit up again. Marcus's face, smiling from a photo I took on a sailing trip last summer. He looked carefree happy. He looked like the man I thought I knew. I let the call go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. By the 4th call, I had started the engine and was pulling out of the garage. Let him wonder. Let him stand on his stage, clutching his award in a room full of whispers, and wonder where his quiet, supportive, invisible wife had gone. The drive home took me along the river, past the gleaming waterfront towers of Apex Dynamics. Our story was written in the steel and glass of the city's skyline. We had built something magnificent. But he had forgotten that no tower can stand without its foundation. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the seat beside me, a frantic, desperate counterpoint to the calm music playing on the radio. The missed call counter climbed. 12, 19, 37. As I turned into the long, familiar driveway of my home, it hit 56. I pulled into the garage and cut the engine, the silence enveloping me like a blanket. Tomorrow, the deconstruction would begin. But tonight, I would sleep in our bed one last time. The woman who had walked into that museum gallery was a ghost. The woman sitting in this car, surrounded by the quiet hum of her own resolve, was finally, terrifyingly, ready to become real. I woke to the gentle gray light of dawn, a familiar Silver Creek morning that felt entirely new. The empty space beside me in our vast bed was not a void, but an expanse of possibility. For the first time in years, the first thought in my head was not about Marcus's schedule or needs, but about my own. What will I do today? The silence in the house was profound. I made coffee, the grinding of the beans the only sound, and took my cup not to the breakfast nook with its view of the river, but to my study. Marcus had always called it my hobby room, a place where I managed the household accounts, organized our social calendar, and tended to my little projects. It was, in fact, the strategic center of our life, and its mahogany filing cabinets held the story he had tried to erase. I opened the first drawer, its contents organized with the meticulous precision that had always been my nature. The file was labeled, Apex, Inception, 1999. My fingers, steady and sure, pulled out the original incorporation documents for Thorne and Vale Development. There was my signature, Serafina Vale, clear and confident, listed as co-founder, with an initial investment of $200,000, the entirety of my inheritance from my grandfather. I took a clear photo with my phone. Evidence. The next file was labeled Riverfront Property Acquisition, 2004. It contained the bank records and personal guarantee I had signed, leveraging our home and my own investment portfolio to secure the $5 million loan that had been the company's first major leap. Marcus's name was on the loan, but my assets were the collateral. Another photo. Another fact. For 3 hours, I worked my way through 2 decades of my life. I documented the stock portfolio I sold to keep the company afloat during the 2008 recession. I scanned the architectural revisions I had drafted for the award-winning Zenith Tower, sketches Marcus had presented as his own rough concepts. I compiled a spreadsheet of every client I had brought in through my family's legal and social connections, a network that had opened doors Marcus could never have unlocked on his own. The final tally, a conservative estimate of my direct capital contributions and leveraged assets, came to just over $30 million, not including the incalculable value of my intellectual and emotional labor. At 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Priya Mehta. "Serafina, good morning," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "The markets are open. I need your final verbal confirmation before I execute the sale of your Apex holdings. There will be no going back from this." "I have no intention of going back, Priya," I said, looking at the mountain of evidence spread across my desk. "Execute the sale. It will create a significant shockwave. The board will panic." "Marcus." "Marcus made his choice," I interrupted gently. "Now I'm making mine. And please, proceed with freezing the joint accounts." "All right," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. "Give me an hour. The wheels will be in motion." I hung up and opened my laptop. The email I'd drafted in the pre-dawn hours was simple and direct, addressed to the Apex Dynamics Board of Directors and its legal counsel. It was a formal notification, devoid of emotion, stating that founding partner Serafina Vale was exercising her right to liquidate her 22% stake in the company, effective immediately. I attached the original incorporation document as a subtle reminder of a history they had all conveniently forgotten. My finger hovered over the send button for a single, deep breath. Then I clicked. 30 seconds later, my phone began to scream. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. I silenced it. It flashed again. I silenced it again. A torrent of text messages followed. "Serafina, what have you done? Call me. The stock is plummeting. Delete. This is madness. You can't destroy 25 years of our work over a misunderstanding. Delete. The board is calling an emergency meeting. You have to stop this. You're being irrational. Delete." I made myself a second cup of coffee and began to sort my documents into neat piles for my lawyer. The constant buzzing of the phone became a kind of background noise, a frantic energy that no longer had the power to touch the core of my calm. Each ignored call felt like taking a step out of a thick fog and into clear air. Then a text from an unknown number. "Serafina, it's Isabel. I think we got off on the wrong foot last night. Marcus is terribly upset, and I'm sure if we all sat down together, we could find a solution that works for everyone." The sheer audacity of it was almost stunning. A solution that works for everyone. As if my life's work, my dignity, and my future were simply business problems to be managed. As if she and I were peers who could negotiate a settlement. I typed a single, measured reply. "There was no misunderstanding, Isabel. And my name is Miss Vale." Her response was instantaneous. "Let's not be childish. A lot of people are depending on this company. You need to think about more than just your hurt feelings." I took a screenshot of her message and filed it away in a new folder on my laptop titled Divorce. The landline rang, its shrill tones startling in the quiet house. Only close family had this number. "Serafina? What in God's name is happening?" My sister, Cora, sounded panicked. "Marcus just called me. He was practically incoherent. He said you've gone mad, that you're trying to ruin him." I walked to the window and looked out at my garden. The climbing roses I'd spent years nurturing were in full bloom, their crimson and ivory petals a testament to patient, steady work. Marcus had never once noticed them. I haven't gone mad, Cora, I said calmly. I've become sane. Did Marcus mention that he's having an affair with his assistant? Did he tell you that she had me thrown out of the anniversary gala last night? A heavy silence stretched between us. Cora, ever the pragmatist, had always admired Marcus's success, always seen our marriage as a stable, enviable partnership. Oh, Serafina, she finally whispered. I had no idea. No one did, I said, a wave of sadness washing over me. That was the whole point. I'm not ruining him, Cora. I'm simply reclaiming what is mine. When I hung up, the house felt truly mine for the first time. The ghosts of expectation and obligation had been exorcised. I returned to my desk, the buzzing phone now sitting silently on the corner, its battery finally dead. The woman who had been publicly shamed was gone. In her place sat a founding partner who knew the precise value of her 22% and who was about to call her lawyer. The emergency board meeting was convened not in the sterile, intimidating conference room at the Apex Tower, but in the library of our home, a room I had designed, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace, and a large bay window overlooking the river. I chose the venue deliberately. This was my ground. I sat at the head of our antique oak table, my lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Sophia Rossi, beside me. My documents were arranged in a single, neat folder in front of me. The other board members, 5 men I had hosted for dinner countless times, filed in looking grim and uncomfortable. They avoided my eyes, their gazes shifting from the stock charts on their phones to the familiar paintings on the walls. Marcus arrived last, storming into the room with a thunderous expression. His perfect silver hair was uncharacteristically messy, his eyes bloodshot with a mixture of rage and sleeplessness. He looked not like a captain of industry, but like a king whose castle was crumbling around him. Isabel was not with him. The battle, it seemed, was his to fight alone. Serafina, he began, his voice a low growl, using the formal name he knew I disliked. Call this off. Now. Before you do irreparable damage. Good morning, Marcus. Gentlemen, I said, my voice even and calm. I nodded to each of them individually. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Don't play these games, he roared, slamming his leather briefcase on the table. You've wiped out nearly 40% of the company's market value in 3 hours. Our lenders are calling in our covenants. You've created a full-blown catastrophe out of pure spite. One of the older board members, Henry Sterling, a man I'd once considered a friend, cleared his throat. Serafina, perhaps we can discuss a less disruptive way to settle your grievances. We all understand you must be very upset. Upset is a feeling, Henry, I replied, my gaze level. What I am is a founding partner who has decided to divest her holdings. This isn't about emotion, it's about assets. Everything I have instructed my advisor to do is perfectly legal and in accordance with the company's bylaws. Marcus began to pace behind his chair, a caged animal. 25 years of work. My vision. And you're tearing it down overnight because you're having a menopausal breakdown. The ugly accusation hung in the air. I saw a flicker of assent in the eyes of one or two of the men. It was the narrative he had been spinning all morning, the only one that could make him the victim. The hysterical woman. The irrational wife. Instead of reacting, I opened my folder. I slid the first document across the polished surface of the table, the original Thorn and Vale Development Incorporation papers. My name, as you can see, is listed here as co-founder, I said quietly. Along with my initial capital investment, which formed the entire seed fund for this company. A fact that seems to have been edited out of the official corporate history. Marcus stopped pacing. His face went pale. I slid a second document across the table. And this is the personal guarantee I signed in 2004, leveraging my private assets to secure the financing for the Riverfront project. The very project, in fact, for which you received the Vanguard Award last night. Sophia, my lawyer, added smoothly, without Ms. Vale's collateral, the bank would never have approved that loan. Apex Dynamics as we know it would not exist. One by one, I presented my evidence. The financial statements showing my cash infusions. The architectural drafts in my own hand. The spreadsheet detailing the clients and contracts secured through my network. It was not an attack. It was a lecture in history, a quiet, factual dismantling of a myth. The room was utterly silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The board members were no longer looking at Marcus with sympathy, but with a dawning horror and recalculation. They were businessmen, and they were looking at a catastrophic liability he had hidden from them for decades. Marcus slumped into his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a gray, hollowed-out shock. "What do you want, Serafina?" he whispered, the words barely audible. "Want?" I asked, a genuine curiosity in my voice. "I don't want anything from you, Marcus. I am simply taking what is, and always has been, mine. My capital, my investments, and my name." I stood up, gathering my papers. The company, as it stands, is on the verge of insolvency. My $30 million divestment is only the beginning. The market has lost confidence not just in the stock, but in its leadership. I looked pointedly at him. A leader who has proven to be untrustworthy. "The board will never let you do this," he said weakly, a last, desperate grasp for power. Henry Sterling spoke, his voice heavy. "The board, Marcus, has a fiduciary duty to its shareholders. And right now, it appears we have a serious crisis of leadership and a massive, undisclosed liability on our hands." He was no longer looking at me as a scorned wife, but at Marcus as a failed CEO. I paused at the door of the library. "I believe you have a decision to make, gentlemen. You can restructure the company, find new leadership, and attempt to salvage what is left. Or you can go down with the ship." I looked at Marcus one last time, seeing not the titan of industry, but a small, frightened man who had built his empire on someone else's foundation. "I'll have Sophia forward the divorce petition to your office this afternoon." I walked out of the library and closed the heavy oak doors behind me, leaving the wreckage of my old life for them to sift through. I could hear the eruption of panicked, angry voices before I was even halfway down the hall. I didn't feel triumph or even satisfaction. I felt a profound and quiet sense of release, as if I had finally set down a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The house was quiet. The river flowed on. And for the first time in a very long time, I was free. In the year that followed, I learned that freedom isn't an event, it's a process. It began with paperwork, the slow, methodical untangling of a shared life, expertly handled by Sophia. The divorce was surprisingly swift. Faced with the undeniable evidence of my financial contributions, Marcus's legal team advised him to settle. He stepped down as CEO of Apex, which was then drastically restructured and sold for parts. I never saw Isabel again. She vanished from the Silver Creek social scene as quickly as she had appeared. My settlement was substantial, but the money was secondary. What mattered was the reclamation. With the capital that was rightfully mine, I didn't retire to a life of quiet leisure. I started a new venture, something small and entirely my own. I called it the Veil Foundation, a boutique investment firm dedicated to funding women-led startups in the arts and sustainable technology, the very fields Marcus had always dismissed as impractical. I sold the grand house on the river, its rooms too full of echoes, and bought a smaller, light-filled loft in the city's historic arts district. I filled it not with antiques and status symbols, but with the work of local artists, with shelves upon shelves of books, and with the happy mess of my own creative projects. I enrolled in a pottery class, something I'd wanted to do for 30 years, and found a deep, grounding joy in the feeling of clay spinning beneath my hands. My instructor, a woman in her 70s with laughter lines etched around her eyes, became a fast friend. We drank wine, talked about art, and never once spoke of men or marriage. I reconnected with my sister, Cora. Our first few conversations were stilted, awkward apologies on her part and quiet acceptance on mine. But slowly, we found a new rhythm. We began to talk about our childhood, our hopes, our fears. We talked as sisters, not as a wife and her audience. One afternoon, she helped me unpack boxes in my new loft. "You seem different," she said, handing me a stack of plates. "Not just happier. You seem bigger." I knew exactly what she meant. I had stopped shrinking myself to fit into someone else's life. About 18 months after the divorce, I was attending the opening of a new gallery my foundation had helped to fund. I was chatting with a brilliant young software engineer whose green tech proposal I was considering when I felt a familiar presence. I turned, and there he was. Marcus looked older. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet hesitancy. He was thinner, and his silver hair seemed more white than silver. He approached me slowly, as if I were a timid deer he might startle. "Serafina," he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You look well." "I am well, Marcus," I replied, my voice calm, my heart steady. There was no anger, no lingering bitterness. There was only a quiet distance, the kind one feels when looking at a very old photograph of a place they used to live. "I saw the article about your foundation," he said, gesturing vaguely. "What you're doing, it's impressive. You always had a good eye for potential." The irony of his statement hung in the air between us, but I let it pass. There was no need to point it out. "I'm sorry," he said, finally meeting my eyes. The apology, when it came, was simple, unadorned with excuses. For everything. For not seeing you. For taking everything for granted. I was a fool. A younger version of myself might have needed to hear those words. She might have cried, or raged, or demanded more. But the woman I was now simply nodded. "Thank you for saying that, Marcus," I said. It was the truth. The apology was a gift, not to me, but to him, the first step in his own reclamation. "I hope you find peace." I gave him a small, final smile and turned back to my conversation, back to the vibrant present I was building. I could feel his gaze on my back as I walked away, but I didn't look back. Outside, the city lights of Silver Creek twinkled against the deepening twilight. I had dinner plans with friends, a weekend trip to the mountains to scout for a new artist retreat, and a life that was rich and full and entirely, gloriously my own. The story of Serafina Thorne was over, a book placed back on the shelf. The story of Serafina Vale was just beginning, its pages open, waiting to be written.